All right, in this video, we are going to talk about JavaFX and SceneBuilder. So, SceneBuilder is a free and open source tool that you can use to lay out a user interface. It's drag and drop, so basically, you can just kind of drag controls and components and put them in your interface. So, it's a really convenient tool for laying out interfaces. And then we can incorporate that into a JavaFX program. All right, so SceneBuilder is developed and maintained by Gluon Software, and that's the same company now that maintains JavaFX. So what you're going to be able to do with SceneBuilder is just lay out your GUI first and get it, looking how you want it to. And then you're just going to import that into a JavaFX program via an FXML file. And FXML is a portmanteau of FX and XML. FX coming from JavaFX, and then XML is extensible markup language, which is a sort of a language that's used to describe certain file structures. We're not going to talk too much about that, but you can open up these FXML files and take a look at them with a just a text editor of some sort, and you can look inside there. In this video, we are just going to talk about the first part of that, and that is laying out the GUI, the graphical user interface. And then in a subsequent video, we will talk about how to incorporate that FXML file into your program, okay? Because that's going to take a little bit more work. All right, so first off, installing SceneBuilder in my class, we're using Java 11. So you just click here, and this will take you to the Gluon site, and then you can download SceneBuilder for Java 11 on whichever operating system that you're on, Windows, Mac, Linux. So you would just download, and it's a pretty straightforward install. So that should really not be an issue. So you would install that. All right, and then what you're going to get when you open up SceneBuilder is a window that looks like that. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and open up SceneBuilder, and it will be under Windows. It'll be under Gluon. If you open that up on the Start menu, and then when you open it on the Start window, you choose. You can choose some default settings. On mine, I'm just going to choose empty. And when you choose empty, you get this window that pops up here. Okay. And so you can see here are the, it's kind of what it looks like when you start off. And there's nothing in here to begin with. Okay. So in this diagram, you can see those various parts laid out. The menu bar is the top on this bar on top. Then we have the path, selection, and message bar that kind of goes across this middle part here. And we have the library panel here, the document panel here, content panel in the middle, and that's where your scene is rendered in there. And then over on the right hand side, you have the inspector panel. All right, so we're going to talk about or give an overview of each of these the main panels in here. Let me see if I can. Get that line back up. Struggling. Okay. All right, first off, the content panel. That's that panel right in the middle, and that shows your current scene. What you would do is drag and drop containers and controls into that scene from your library panel. So your library panel is up here. Okay. And then you can also inside the content panel You can click on containers and controls and other items in the content panel to activate them. So just as an example of kind of how you would start, the first thing you would start is to choose your root container. Remember we talked about that in the previous videos. So let's just go with pane for the time being. So you would just drag, click on pane over here in the library panel and drag it, and that would give you your content panel. All right, and you might be able to, yeah, you can resize that in there. Okay, and do other various things with that. All right, and then you can click on over here in the library panel. You can drag, say you want a button in there somewhere. You can click and drag the button and put it over here. Okay. All right. So, and it's sort of in this content panel, it's kind of what you see is what you get. That's how it will be rendered out in your application when you start it. All right, next up is the library panel, and that's this panel over here. You can see that is divided into a lot of different sections: containers, controls, glue-on, which has some other built-in components that you can use, menus, things for making menus, miscellaneous, things for making shapes or charts, or even some 3D things that you can set up in your scene. Okay, and so those are the components, right? Things that are going to go in your scene for the most part. And like I said, you would just kind of drag and drop them over into the main panel. Okay, the control panel. You can also use this text field up here at the top to search for things, like if you wanted to find a text area, right? You could search for that text area and then pull it over into your scene. Okay. So this is pretty much things that are going into your scene. All right, next up is the hierarchy panel down here, down in the document panel. The document panel has two important parts. The hierarchy panel, this basically shows you the scene graph, right, for your scene. Sometimes, you know, if you have a fairly complicated scene, you'll have a bunch of controls that are inside containers that are maybe inside other containers, and when you look at it in the content panel in here, it's really difficult to kind of see that when it's all kind of flattened out like it'll appear to the user. But in this hierarchy panel, then you can see where those things are more easily, and you can select them. So for instance, if I click down here in the hierarchy panel, it will select the button. Now, this scene is not that complicated, but if you have a complicated scene, this is really useful for picking out components that are nested deep down in your scene in an accurate way, rather than trying to click on them over here where maybe you click on the right thing and maybe you don't. You can find it more easily in the hierarchy panel. All right, and then the controller panel. The controller panel, that can be used to set the controller for the scene. Okay, we haven't really done that yet. Basically, up until now, we've kind of been doing fairly simple applications and putting them inside of just one class. But now we're going to see that we're going to start separating things out a little bit, and that just makes it easier if you're designing more complicated programs. Okay, so if I click on this controller pane here, I can set the controller and do things that way. So this would be the name of your controller class. So you can just call it controller for the time being. Okay. All right, and so that controller class is going to be the class it's going to be a Java class that will control all the event handling for the scene. So what's going on now is that we will be moving, when we're using SceneBuilder and FXML to do our scenes, we're going to be moving that controller code out of the main application class into another class. Okay. All right. Next up is the inspector panel. The inspector panel is over here on the right hand side. Okay, and there are three main sub panels. There are the properties, layout, and code. Okay, so properties, you can use that to set the properties of a node. So for instance, right here I have this button, and I don't want it to say button, I want it to say click me. Right, I can go here and I can type that in there. Right, and so that's what the button will look like. Okay, so you can control some properties of the button. Here are properties of the pane. So you can see now the pane is selected once I hit enter. If you want to set the properties for the button, make sure you click on the button and then set these properties. Otherwise you might be setting it for something else. So make sure you are setting properties and the layout and the code for the correct component when you do that. Make sure it's selected before you start changing these values. In the layout panel, you can adjust the settings affecting the layout of the node. So if I go to here and I have the button clicked, right, I can set its max height and width height are preferred, right, and width height here. I think on the button I have to use set it to not managed first. Maybe you can change its position, right, as well. So that will change the position. Although to me, right, when you're using SceneBuilder, it's just as easy to set the, you can just drag and drop the position. It will adjust that. You want to rotate your button, you can rotate it, and other things like this. Okay. All right, and then finally down in the code section, there are some very, very important things. There's two critical functions for the applications that we built, are going to build it first in this panel. One is setting the FX ID. All right, so you must do that if you want to be able to control your node or component in your controller class. So you would go up here and give a name, right? The name that you want for the control. In this case, it's a button. Okay, so that's one of the critical things that you have to do. A lot of the errors, right, when you're first starting off in this is forgetting to set this FX ID. Okay. All right, and then the other thing that is also very, very important here is to set the on action of the node. Okay, so if you want to control your application, didn't mean to do that. All right, so if you want your application to respond to events and those sorts of things like that, which you typically would with a button, right, you would need to set the on action in here, and there's lots of them. So if we click the button right here, oops, see, I made that mistake I told you guys about. I called the pane button. So make sure I click on the button, right, and then give it the FX ID button, and then for the on action, I'm just gonna give it the name of the method that I want it to call to handle that button. So right when the user clicks on the button, there's going to be an action event generated, and this is the name of the method in the controller class that you specified over here under controller that will be called right when this button is clicked. Okay, so there we go. We can see we have the FX ID and the on action handled. So those are two very important things that you need to do. Now, if you have something like a label over here that's static and doesn't do anything in your program, right? It's just there as a label, like the name implies. Then you don't need, to set the FX ID or the on action. In fact, you can see there's no on action for this label. There are some other actions and things that you can do, but if it's just there as a label and has no other functionality, then you don't really need to do this. Okay, but for anything that you want to that you want to respond to the user interacting with it, you're going to have to set the FX ID and at least the on action for it. Okay. All right, so that's what you would do in JavaFX. Get this laid out like you want it. Okay. And the workflow typically would be like this. You would start a new scene, right? Just like we did. You would go over here and register the name of your controller right here. Add the root container, which was the pane in this example that we did. And so containers are up here. So you would pick which one you want as your root container and drag it over here to start off with. And then add another container or control, however you want to do that. And remember to set the FX ID and the on action for the container or control if you want your application to interact with it. So like for instance the button, right? We went down here to code, set the FX ID and the button, okay? And then just repeat that. As you're laying this out, you're adding more containers and more controls, right? Then you're going to get the scene that you want and get it built out how you like it, okay? And then when you save this, you go to File, Save As, right? And then whatever you want to call it, my FXML. All right, you can see all the changes are saved in here. You will get a couple of warnings in here, but that's okay. Sometimes you'll get some errors in there as well. You can preview your scene. So show preview in window. This is what it will look like, and you can interact with it and do other things. At least, you know, it won't have full functionality or anything in there. Okay, but at least you get a pretty good preview of what it looks like. All right, and then very, very importantly, the controller, right? If you go here to show sample controller skeleton, it will pop this up, right? And you will get the controller. So you can see some things that are in there. Hopefully you can see them because the print is pretty small. But number one, it has the imports that you need in here. Okay. And number two, you can see that it has that button that we added, the FX ID of the button, right? It becomes a field in your controller class. You can see it's marked with this @FXML annotation, right? And that is important so that it will link up your FXML file in your main application with this controller class. You can see that the name of the controller class, right, is there. That came from setting it down here in the controller panel in the document panel. And then lastly, the handle button event is here. And that was, remember, with the button, that was the name of the on action that we set. So this method will be called when somebody clicks a button. And then what we'll do in here is just add the code in here later on that performs, you know, the things that we want performed when the user clicks the button. Okay. And so what you would do is just copy this right out. Just hit this copy button. It will copy this and paste it into your controller class. And then you would get started with hammering out the details on your event handlers, these methods. Okay. All right. So that's sort of an overview. Again, in the next section, we will talk about and go through an example where you lay this out like you want it, and then how do you get this going in your main application. So, but for right now, we're just focusing on using SceneBuilder itself. All right, so that is the standard workflow. Okay, so let's go ahead and work through this in-class problem. We want to set this scene up, so let's do that. All right, I'm going to close this off. And I didn't want to do that completely. Maybe I should start it here. Okay, it started in the other window, so I'm clicking on empty, and I want to make this small scene right here. In this small scene, I've got it's basically just maybe like what you would see for a login window to your application. All right, this pops up, and you gotta type in your username and password in there. Okay, so I'm gonna just use a pane here. There we go. Keep going past it. All right, and that size seems okay to me. Then what I'm going to do in there to get the image is put in an image view. So that would be under controls. And just kind of position that in there. Oops. And I just navigate to the image and open it up. All right, and so there you go. There's the image. And just kind of put it right in there. All right, so far so good. You can see that this is really big compared to the one in the example. So I guess we could cut that down. So if we select here on the pane, we could set the width and height of the pane to something smaller. Let's say all right, so I just sort of drag and drop it like that. It looks okay. All right, so far so good. All right, and then we have a label and a text field, so let's do that. So label, we might as well drag two of these out of here. And on this label, we want to have username. So we would go over here to the inspector panel and go under properties, and under text, it would be username. And then this one is password. Now, all of these things are static so far. This image, these labels, I don't plan on doing anything with those in my application. They're just going to be there. So that's why I'm not bothering to set the FX ID or anything other like that. But now, what I want for below username is a text field that goes in there so the user can type in their name. So text field. All right, so that looks okay. And now this text field I definitely am going to have to interact with, right? So over here, I'm going to go into with the text field active, I'm going to go into the inspector panel. I'm going to select code, and I am going to give it a name, username text field. And I'm going to set an on action handle user name text field. All right, and so now then this will set up a field, right, in my controller, and in this will set up a method. And by the way, I did forget, right, to set my controller class. So down over here in the document, right, I would put controller or login controller. That needs to be a class name, a legitimate class name in Java. All right, and so another text field I could put here, but there actually is one for a password called password field, right? And so I could drag that and put it in here. And then likewise, I am definitely going to want to interact with this. So highlight the password field and then give it an ID. I'm just going to call it password field with the starting with a lowercase p, and then handle password field on that. And let's see the errors I had. I think that's okay. Okay, and so you want to test it out, you can go over here to preview, and you can see that you can type in the name here, the username, and if you type in the password field, you can see that it's obscured, right, like it should be. Okay, and I think that is it, right, on this one, close enough. And let's just go over here to check out the controller once I have everything set up. Right, and remember this, I am going to be copying and pasting this into another Java class. You can see, right, these are my FX IDs up here, username text field, password field. Here are my methods, right, my on actions that I generated in there, all marked with the fxml annotation. So that will help link up the fxml file that I generate and the and this Java code here. Okay. Let's see. I think we could also view the if there's a way to view the fxml. I'm going to save it. I thought there was a way to do that, but maybe not. I'm just going to save it. And then I'm going to open it up in Notepad, and you can see that's what the actual fxml looks like. Okay, so you can see it's pretty short. There's not a whole bunch of stuff, but there are some things in here that link your controller name, right, and your FX IDs over here, username text field, password text field, and handle username text field. This is your method, your event handling methods in here. Okay. All right, that is it on this method. In the next video, we will work through another example.